characters.
Forgetful Jones. Speaking of forgetting what characters he played, he was Forgetful Jones on Sesame Street.
I will take over the role. Anyways, we were trained, and we thought, well, gosh, that's kind of rude that they don't want us to play the leads and stuff. And then the leads came into town, and we sort of sat there and watched their puppetry and realized that while we were very good puppeteers, we were nowhere near as good as these guys. And so we sort of took a big gulp and went, well, I guess we got something to learn here.
Richard was great. I just loved Richard Hunt, and he was one of those guys that was never actually instructed me in anything. At no point ever said, okay, you want to look here, you want to look here, you want to do your lipstick like this, you want to, just not a word about that. But by example, he was one of the best teachers imaginable. I just loved watching him work and listening to him, and he was crazy. He was a nut job of the first order, and when he walked into a studio, you could feel the energy. The energy went up because everyone in the studio either said out loud, or you could feel the energy. But the feeling was, Richard Hunt's in the room. We're gonna fun now. We're gonna see something we haven't seen before. And and he never disappointed. He was always was just a fountain of energy. I mean, that's the way I remember Richard, and just everyone was fair game. Everyone was a target. Everyone to his wit. His characters were just always very interesting, very extreme, very, very funny. He was just great. There's so many Richard Hunt stories. But mostly it was just the experience of that incredible man, and the energy that he brought. When he passed away, I thought, okay, if I could bring just a percentage of that kind of energy into the studio, I kind of took that on as a sacred task, and to be able to lift a room like that and really bring the energy up, just to grab it and force the energy through the roof if necessary. He was just a force of nature, that man.
I think one of the nicest moments I remember was Richard Hunt, who was a performer on Sesame Street. And we had, for the 25th anniversary, it was this big scene in the middle of the street with all these adults and all these kids. And whenever a kid would come in to visit the set, Richard, if he was free, would go to the Muppet box and just take a Muppet and just start entertaining the kid. So in between, this huge crowd with all these kids, they had to readjust something. So Richard just grabbed a puppet, or used his puppet, I think it was Forgetful Jones, and just started entertaining the kids. And it was one of the sweetest things, just to see these kids interacting with the puppet. And that's what's great about having kids come and visit Sesame, or even when we had kids visit Bear, because it's like a little reminder, oh yeah, this is why we're doing it. It's there's a schedule, there's a budget, but this is the reason why we're here wiggling dolls.
The first time I had assisted Richard Hunt, and Richard had a reputation for just being funny and reading the newspaper a lot and going up at the last minute right before the shot. So literally I'm sitting there. There was a scene where Beaker is in the 3D lab helping Bunsen, and there was this gag where he's pulling levers and there's this big wheel that's turning. It looks almost like a water wheel, and he gets caught in it and it pulls him up onto the wheel. And that was a dummy Beaker that they strapped on with Velcro. But I'm helping Richard, and he had to do all this. you know, and he's doing all this stuff and then falls down. And then the dummy Beaker goes around and Richard would just off stage go, what, you know, do his thing. So I'm sitting there with Richard exactly reading a newspaper. We both have hard hats on because they're afraid that wheel's going to hit us in the head. I'm like 23 years old. We're sitting there and he says, here, you hold him. He hands me Beaker. I've got both of my hands in Beaker's hands and he's just doing the head. And so he's reading the newspaper and I have a pretty heavy accent, particularly back then I did for a Southern accent. So Richard says, well, you sound like you have an accent. He said, where are you from? And I'm like, well, I'm from Georgia. Well, I can hear it now. Your folks are going to go to the movie and say, I can see my son. That's his head right there on the TV. He's making fun of my accent. And I felt like I had been accepted, you know, into the tribe because he was making fun. I thought, oh, that's great. And so he was a blast. We did the shot, and sure enough, they're counting down. And Richard, we're ready. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. He's right up there like he had done it 1,000 times. And then I had other bits that happened. Just working with Frank Oz assisting was fun. The stuff they do backstage and say to each other is very funny. Some of it you can repeat, some of it you can't, but it's hilarious. I had an audition. One of the producers, Jim's assistant at the time, now her name's going to escape me. See, I'm getting old. It'll come to me. His assistant, he was with him, you know, pretty much, you know, most of the time. She said, oh, they want to audition you for a show that's coming up. And Richard Hunt's going to do the audition. I said, okay. So he comes up and says, Ricky, grab a puppet, just any of those puppets off the stand. And he grabs a puppet. He says, follow me. And we go behind a flat, but there's nobody back there except me and Richard Hunt and these 2 puppets. And he says, go up. So we both go up and he just says, look left, look right, look over there. We don't even have a camera. He's just watching the puppet. And I don't want to say, how family safe is your show?
I have a bleeper, don't worry.
Okay. I don't want to do anything offensive, but he said, his puppet leans over and says, hey, you want to have sex with me?
Oh my God.
and I thought, what do I do? And I paused. I had the puppet pause, and my puppet says, no, but my mother will do anybody.
Oh my God.
And he says, you'll be fine. So that was the end of it. He said, you'll be fine.
Oh man.
So it was a very bizarre audition, but it was typical of, it sounded what most of the, again, I didn't know him very well, but it was very funny. And he, I think, was just trying to see what I would do if he threw me a curveball.
Richard was lots of fun and very gregarious. Yeah, and Richard, I got to know a bit more. He was sort of, I think because he auditioned all the puppeteers and he was, I think unofficially, maybe the puppet captain, which was a term that wasn't really around then. But Richard was lots of fun too, and but much more gregarious. Again, another fine human being, really good guy.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good stories about him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was so funny too. Like his characters, and no matter what it was, his characters were so crazy.
Yep. Yeah, Mr. Energy, and lots of. I have this great memory of Richard coming in hungover one day.
Oh my God!
And as he picked up his puppet, just saying kind of to himself but out loud, "Oh, why did I pick a profession where I have to be happy all the time?"
And so I drove to the audition. Now, the first audition sort of took place on a Monday, it all happened very fast because like a weekend, and then all of a sudden I'm going and all that stuff on a Monday. And Richard Hunt was doing the first set of auditions, famous for Scooter, Janice, Beaker, a lot of those guys.
Dawn Music, Forgetful Jones, Sully, Gladys the Cow, Sonny Friendly.
That's right. Yeah. And so, you know, the audition there and waiting with people there. And like, my mother came with me for the first part of this trip. And we were sitting there waiting to be called into the audition. And people were coming out of the audition frazzled and kind of, you know, not knowing what it was like. You know, it was just a shock to them. It was like crazy in there. One girl came out to, the guy's crazy. The guy's crazy. And she just, you know, went on there. My mother turned to me and said, if they want crazy, you give them crazy. Kind of thing. So, okay. So I went in there, and Richard was very, he was like a drill sergeant. Okay, all right, I want you to go over here, and I'm going to have this picture taken of you there. Okay, that's great. Okay, now get over here, sit down, and we're going to, you know, I'm Richard Hunt and all that stuff. Sit down, and okay, and then he stopped. Do you stop? So I had brought with me a suitcase with my own puppets in there, and I would take them out one by one and do these things for Richard. And I had a very awful looking Fozzie Bear, and did my Fozzie Bear routine, and had the Kermit, my awful looking Kermit puppet, which was made of an upholstery type of fabric. And I said, excuse me, Mr. Hunt, I'm not sure I like the way you're treating these people here. And he looked, oh yeah, what are you going to do about a frog? You know, kind of thing. Well, nothing. You're doing fine. Keep going. Nothing like that. So, and he said, yep, you got to stay till Friday. Jim's going to love you. Kind of thing. And I want you to stay for Friday. You'll come in Friday night. You'll see Jim himself.
Yeah, I'm talking about, like, there were two worlds. The one was the Sesame Street world was affected. I mean, one of our best, and that I mean, really, that kind of tears in my heart thinking about him. He was, you know, he's exactly my age, and you know, he'd be here talking to you. You know, it's heartbreaking, but he didn't have to be told to go over the top with Placido Flamingo.
Yeah, he would just do it.
It just was. I think it was as unleashed Richard, you know, like Volcano Richard, as much as any of his characters. It was, you know, he just could not go too far with Placido, and it was. So yeah, that I thought maybe there's a lot of kids. At least they'd hear opera in their ears, you know, that it wouldn't be alien to them later in life if they heard some, oh, that was like on Sesame Street, I heard opera, it's not scary. And so that one made me feel good. And then the day came when the other Placido, as we called him.
Yeah, on the 20th anniversary special, where they did a duet together.
Yes, that was true. And I was looking, I thought, okay, he wouldn't be here if he was insulted, you know, because one of the attributes of Placido Flamingo was his ego, you know, which is kind of a stereotype of an opera tenor that they don't like, and yet he showed up, so I guess he was cool with it. That's funny. Beside myself, you know, that Placido Domingo is coming here and singing with my character.
Jerry, I adored with he was just the best and most wonderful guy. Him and Richard, you know, starting out with the two of them was heaven. I mean, they were just a wonderful, when I started with the company, Frank and Jim would come in just a couple of days a week maybe of the season and do just all their stuff together. And that was fantastic. It was like watching them work together was a college education in performance and in how television works and how comedy works. They were fantastic. But the day-to-day I was Jerry and Richard. And
Yeah, they were kind of
that-
like the in and out puppeteers.
yeah, Jerry and Richard were just there, and they were wonderful and funny and just great guys to learn how to do this really bizarre art that we do.
So anyway, that's how I got on Sesame Street, is that I did that workshop that was 2 weeks long, and Richard Hunt was in that workshop as well.
Right.
And after 1 week, they let some of the wannabe puppeteers go. And then after the second week, Richard and I and some other people were hired to do this Ed Sullivan special. And then after that, Jim asked Richard and I if we wanted to do Sesame Street. And, you know, Richard was all over it immediately. But I said to Jim, gosh, you know, this has been fun, but I'm an actress. I want my face to be seen. And he said, oh, okay, well, you know, why don't you just try it? You know, I think back then the seasons were short. You know, it's varied so much. It's been 6 months. It's been 3 months. But anyway, I agreed to do that for some reason. I guess I thought, well, this is gonna at least be some money, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you just have to think about that.
I mean, everything we did was, and I learnt sort of my musical vocabulary from all the stuff we did, because they were all old songs. You know, there were a few new songs written for the show, but most of the music was classic old songs. And, you know, I didn't know Guys and Dolls, and with Pearl Bailey we did "You Got the Heart Right Here." His name is Paul Revere.
Paul Revere.
I didn't know where that was from. And Richard Hunt, who was my sort of teacher and buddy, you know, you have to learn all these shows. You have to know this is great history of Broadway. So that was my education as well, on musical theatre and all this stuff. Oh my God, it was incredible. I was in America when Richard died. I was with him.
Oh.
I was on holiday. He'd wanted a holiday, Christmas holiday for his family. And in the end, he was too ill to come with us. We went to Utah, and he couldn't, he stayed behind in New York with his mother, but wanted us all to go, the family. And then we came back, and I was with him and going to visit him in the hospital and there when he died. So,
Oh God.
yeah. So that was really, really tough. So I didn't do, you know, and I'd been to see Sesame Street when he was doing it.
Right.
And to the studio. But when I finally did it, Richard was dead, which was terribly sad.
You know, and Jerry used to talk about this too, is when Richard Hunt was alive, and I know that he really, really dates back, but Jerry and Richard had a real rhythm together. So when they did the Two-Headed Monster together, or they did the two Martians together, or Biff and Sully, like, you know, I think Jerry was Biff and Richard Hunt was
Richard
Sully.
was Sully, yep.
Yeah, they had a rhythm together, and that was part of why these characters were so funny, and they had these layers. Was because they just got each other, and they knew, and some of the ad libs they did were hysterical, you know.
And you saw a lot more feeling from Sully, because Biff was always just so overly confident about himself all the time. Sully never was overly confident. He's like, I know I can do it. You know, I'm not going to push too hard for it. And, you know, Biff, of course, never let him speak. I remember, Sully, I told you not to start work until I got back here with a radio. I don't know what you're doing with all this, what you're trying to build with all this stuff, but I know you're not trying to build a radio. Like, you never let him speak, but Sully just was like, screw it. I saw one moment where Richard's like shaking the Sully puppet, looking like he's angry. And finally, like, for years, I just thought that Sully was like nonverbal or something, and then finally I realized Sully's probably thinking, if this dude doesn't shut the hell up.
That's really, yeah, because you could, you know, Richard would do these subtle motions, like Biff would say something ridiculous, and then Sully would just look at the camera like, "Are you kidding me?" He didn't say anything, but you knew just from that little subtle motion that that's what he was thinking. You know.
I once saw Richard move Sully's mouth to what Jerry was saying as Biff, and I thought he was mocking him.
Oh, that's funny. I've never seen that. That's funny.
It's like Biff was the. This is gonna totally make me sound like a doofus, but it's like Biff was the ventriloquist and Sully was the dummy.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.